Hello, and welcome to another chapter of The Curmudgeon in the Cellar. Tonight's first topic I'm going to talk about addresses two issues. Actually, we'll just take care of it at the same time. And that was, I had mentioned in a previous episode the incident at GenCon. And this goes to the ethos that it's my world and it works the way I want it to. This was several years ago at GenCon. I had a long table, 8, 9 players, and we were playing along. And I noticed this one guy on the right side of the table, down a couple of seats, kept muttering, and I didn't pay much attention. For all I knew, he was on a telephone, and the play goes on, and he's muttering some more, and all of a sudden he goes, "You can't do that." And needless to say, I've never had anybody challenge me just like that and tell me I can't do something in a game I'm running. And I was kind of taken aback, but I'm always on my absolute very best behavior at GenCon. You may choose to believe that or not, but I am. And I said, I don't know what the problem is, but I'm doing it. Let's get on with the game. And that wasn't good enough. No. I couldn't do something or other because that wasn't the way he had read it to be or how it happened or whatever. I don't even remember what it was. The mere fact that the guy got up and challenged me at my own table at GenCon in Lake Geneva just gobsmacked me. So again, I apologized. I said, "Well, hey man, if you're not having a good time, that's okay. Go ahead and you can leave and go tell them at the desk that I said to refund you because my games were like a silver ticket or a gold ticket or something. I don't know, like being an e-ticket at Disneyland, I guess. I'm not sure. But no, he proceeded to give me some more gas and walked down a couple of steps towards me, while he decided to tell me why I couldn't do something. And I told him, I said, "Well, I'm sorry you feel this way, but if you read the program book, you said that you saw that this was OD&D, and this is the way OD&D works." And he went on about, "Well, that's not the way it's written in the book." And to this day, I don't know what book he was actually referring to. Though afterwards, the whole table had a good laugh and figured he must have been a 3.5 player based on his arguments. I wouldn't know. I don't pay attention to any of the others. But anyway, that was the incident at GenCon. I told him, "Well, if you're having so much fun, then why don't you just please leave and quit disrupting my game?" And I just we didn't play until he walked off in a huff. And at that point, I wasn't even going to give him a refund. Guy'd already wasted 10 or 15 minutes of our time arguing with me. And anybody that knows me well enough knows that while I do enjoy a good argument, I pick my arguments, I pick my time, I pick my field. And stopping in the middle of one of my games at a convention to argue with me is none of those. So anyway, that was the incident at GenCon. I never heard from the guy again. Nobody from the con came and said, "Hey, so-and-so came up with a tale of woe" or anything. So that was the incident at GenCon, or GenCon rather. But that goes to it's my world. That's the way I say it works, which is very old schoolish. You have to go back and read the old editions, read the old books. Every one of them had a preface or an introduction or an editorial piece that said, "These are suggestions. Tinker with them as you will. Ignore the ones you choose." So it was the wild, wild, woolly west in terms of one campaign to another. The commonality was PC types and dice. Everything else was out there. But that was fun because in playing with other DMs or going around and playing in other games, and particularly that's something we did at the cons back then, especially the small ones, you got a feel for how other people were doing it. You may pick up a neat idea on your own. I will admit to having picked up several ideas over the years from games I sat in on or watched and make no bones about it, because that was the nature of the beast at that period of time. So that's my opener on the incident. It was no Oxbow incident. Nobody got lynched. Just guy got his shorts in a bunch and was then finally asked to leave the table. That's all. Now let's talk about bards. I'm not real fond of bards for the most part. And yet, there is an adventure that I wrote and have run at several cons that features one. But the setting in which it's used is so one-off that I put it in for a reason. I'll explain in a minute. I don't know if you know who Dan the Bard is. If you don't, Google Dan the Bard. Marcotte, I believe, is his last name. I should know by now. God knows I've sold enough CDs for him over the years. He writes hilariously funny D&D songs, role-playing songs, if you will. But obviously, he has his grounding in D&D. And he has a song on one of his recent CDs called Bard Camp. And it's hilarious about what goes on at Bard Camp stays at Bard Camp. And how a first edition Bard got picked on by a second edition Bard, and the fun and hilarity that ensued when he found out he was going to get his ass kicked because they were much tougher in the other edition. Bards, again, were something that I thought would be useful as an NPC, not a PC. I don't see people running around dressed in scarlet playing, songs of love and unrequited passion and chivalry and all that kind of stuff. Hey, if you do, that's okay. That just doesn't fit my vibe. And so when I have used bards, which has been rather sparingly, I generally made them available as an NPC, either as a source of information, or occasionally as an accompanying group to get there and, okay, you're on stage sing. Or, once I made one available, they thought he was going to have to sing. He thought he was going to have to sing, but actually the only singing he had to do was 5 notes that opened this acoustic lock. So, okay, if you want to write that kind of stuff in, they can be useful. I have used one to good extent in a situation where it works. So I'm not saying they're useless. Like paladins, I just don't like them cluttering up my campaign, but I always put them out there available for people to use as pre-gens. And I wrote an adventure called All Is Not Well in Bosky Dell. And this group of middling, by old school standards, middling, upper, lower, middling level fighters. There's a cleric and a couple of thieves and a 4th level magic user, and the rest of them are 4th and 5th level fighters. And they don't have a lot of magical stuff dripping out of their ears or anything. They're pretty much mundane, jack of all trades adventurers. And in it, through a mechanism I won't discuss, they all get turned into mice. And it's anthropomorphic, so the swordsman can still, he has a little tiny epee that he fights with. And I turned the magic user into a bard because there was no way out. For one thing, I didn't want to do the math to scale down all the spell effects that some magic user might use, because I got no idea what spells anybody's going to take at one of my games. And I'm not going to sit there and go through every single spell and figure out, how that goes. So I've turned him into a bard who has a couple of bardish skills. And he also has 2 songs. He has a feather song and a fur song. And both of those are extremely effective at least getting a feathered or a furred creature to slow down and negotiate. Perhaps even become your friend, but it's not like you're getting immediately eaten by a huge raven who when I was doing all this research and crawling around in my stomach for several days, getting a perspective for the artwork and everything, found out that just about everything eats mice. So he's a very, very effective, very pivotal character in that adventure, which goes back to my original assertion that as an NPC, they're sweet. When they have a purpose, when they fit into something, when they have a skill that nobody else has, fine. But, running around with a lute and a dagger is, not LOO, but LU, lute, running is like being a magic user at first or second level. You're pretty precarious and you really don't want to fight them, but if you have to, you will. So I think they're fun to have in a campaign, but I don't think they're one of the ones that people try to play that work very well. Someone before I did this tonight invited me to read a redo he did of Bards. I said, well, no, I'm going to talk about Bards the way I feel about them right now, the way I've been thinking about them all week, and perhaps I'll go read that later. Without trying to sound smug or aloof or I'll pick another word, I just don't pay much attention to what other people write about. Oh, you can do this better, you can do that better. I play my game that I have honed and refined since 1974. And that's what I play. And I really don't care enough to see what somebody else says this is a better way to do, because I've probably altered and modified them in my own inimitable style to fit into my campaign already. And I believe that when you get to tinkering with the basics of the rules, you only do so within the framework of a single campaign. You don't let somebody that's got all buffed up somehow in one of these extraordinary adventures, then you don't let him run loose along the rest of your campaign world, running around, and all of a sudden he's the only guy with super strength or superpowers or whatever. So again, all things in moderation. Let's see, what do I have next on my list? Okay, well, we'll save that. Oh, all right. 2 things come up before the third one. The enigmatic 7 days in Gary's office is going to be my last topic. Several people seem to be interested in segmented initiative, which is something we introduced in Eldritch Wizardry. For some time, I'd been having conversations with Gary as we honed and refined the game about needing to break down into a logical format that everything could be plugged into, how to break down the turn. Okay, we'd already broken down turns into rounds, and now we're going to break down rounds. And the whole point was to create a 10 flash stroboscopic effect that would freeze the melee that's going on, the swirling, the clashing of the arms, the flying of the missiles. It would freeze it 10 times during the course of that round. And how you rolled, that's something I picked up. I can't remember where, but years ago I saw somebody rolling D10s for initiative. I said, oh my God, yeah. Because we didn't use D10s or D20s as D10s back in the day. I don't know if we just hadn't thought of it yet or nobody made a D10. I mean, if you needed a 10 result, you didn't have anything else. Yeah, you used D20 and divided by 2. But we didn't design stuff structured around using a D10 at that time. Pardon me. So it was designed that, okay, if you're always prepped. Maybe you're preternaturally quick, or you're wearing something, or something's been cast upon you where you cannot be surprised. When you always go first. And if you're really fast, then you might find that on the first round you fire your bow once, but on the second round you're able to fire it twice, because within those frames of 10, maybe it took 6 in the first round before you got your arrow, and I'll explain that in a second. So if you fired at 6 in the first round and it took 6, that meant you fired at 2 in the next round and at 8 in that round. So those people that had those speeds, those buffs, those bonuses, were actually able to benefit from them. You had a chance, if you're a quick archer, to get 2 arrows into the target before he comes and rips your throat out. If you were casting a very involved spell, when the way we play at my table now, everybody rolls. Whenever there's conflict or combat, everybody rolls. 1s go first, 0s go last. And in my case, whenever I have whatever 9 number is, I let the players who have the same number go before I do. So I always give them a chance. They might kill me before I actually get to move or do anything. Figure that's only fair, because God knows there's enough ways I can kill them in there. Pardon me, I need a sip here. I'd tell you who I'm drinking, but they haven't offered to pay me yet, so oops, I guess you could see. I'm not insensitive, I just don't care. So the segmented rounds took into account, oh shoot, I got to get another spell ready. And so, and once again, I'll refer to Jolly and the Knights. That's something that Jolly deals with. Brian's always bringing this spell online and pulling out his physical ingredients and practicing his somatics, his gestures and stuff. So it was a way for people with bennies or weapons that were, really, really good, particularly missile weapons, particularly like a crossbow. If you had a crossbow that could fire twice a turn and every once in a while 3 times, that was pretty something. Of course, it would be magical, obviously, to be that fast. Because Lord knows if you ever try to shoot a crossbow, pulling the cord back requires magic or a really strong arm. So anyway, that's where segmented initiative came in. I still use it. Ran a game today at a little local con, a new type of OD&D game I'm practicing on for the people at Game Hole. Boy, did I get a lot of good pointers today out of that practice. Anyway, the game I ran today, a couple of people were surprised when I told them, okay, you rolled a 2. And I look over, because I knew the characters, and like I had a high speed, a high dex, or whatever. And I said, yeah, you can shoot on 2, and you can also shoot on 9. They kind of looked at me. I go, yeah, that's the way the turn sequence breaks down, and that bow you have is faster than normal. And I pointed to that they hadn't read everything on their pre-gen sheet about this. He hadn't read everything about this bow, so. Oh yeah, I guess it pays to read those things in advance. So that's the way segmented initiative came out. Came out of several months of discussion between Gary and I. At odd times, odd moments, he'd be taking a break from tapping on his typewriter, and I'd be coming back from lunch and whatever. And okay, and we'd talk about initiative again, and how much time should this take, and how much time should that take. And so we did a lot of research, and back then it wasn't going to Google and asking, it was going to the library and finding out, like Guinness records for how fast somebody could shoot a bow and arrow, stuff like that, and then scaling it back to something that was not a game breaker. We actually couldn't have, somebody shooting 4 arrows every turn, though, as I recall, that might have It had me straight converted over the record at the time. That might have been it. But we went and we did research on things like that. We timed each other literally with stopwatches. Uh, we mimicked slinging a sling, pulling a rock out of our pocket, or even having the rock ready, putting it back in, slinging again, went with a stopwatch. So how fast could you? And then we allowed for the fact that none of us were worth a damn on a sling. So we were probably the slow end of the scale, and we allowed for that. So segmented initiative came from trying to make that stroboscopic effect, not just once every round, but 10 little micro flashes each round. So everybody had a chance to benefit from their skills and abilities, or suffer for their lack thereof. But that's where segmented initiative come. It came because after months of talking about it, Gary said, all right, you want to go write it up and let me know what you come up with. And I wrote it up that weekend, brought it in. He read through it that day, and later that afternoon before we went home for the day, he says, yeah, it's fine, put it in. And so that's the way it came about. Lots and lots of talk, and then I did a lot of research, and then I crunched and put it in, and that's where it came from. And again, it's real loosey-goosey. It's something that I feel free to, if somebody rolls a, if they roll a not a, I don't play critical hits or critical fumbles, but if in the course of rolling dice and they have a pretty piss poor response and you can get a little humor out of it, you just say, oh, well, you dropped the feather you needed for that. I had 3 more segments to your 6. Now you go on 9. So they don't lose the whole turn, maybe. Or, if they were on 6 and they lose 5, okay, you're automatically going on the first turn of the next round. So it's just a way of meshing the various things that are going on, the various weapons being used, the swirling eddy of a great melee. I can't get out of my mind when I think of a mass melee, and mass being like, 10, 12, 15 people all swirling around in a confined area. I think back to some of the good old Douglas Fairbanks movies and the Errol Flynn movies, and some of the good Ivanhoe and some of that, and they'd be clanging away. And if only you could stop, and see what was actually going on, that's the effect we were trying to achieve. So it was the strobe effect, and we didn't do too bad with it. Another question I was asked to talk about, or another topic, was how Dragon came to be. The concept of Dragon came to be well before I went to work there. Gary had been putting out Strategic Review, as many small game clubs in the Midwest had their little newsletters. Gary was a newsletter for both his gaming group, and he'd pump a few products in there that, Cavaliers and Roundheads and some of that stuff. Warriors of Barsoom, which they had to pull. But anyway, in our earliest talks, he knew that I was studying communications at SIU in Carbondale, Southern Illinois University, at Carbondale, which still has an amazingly active gaming group, which I'm proud to say I helped grow while I was there. And they, poor guys, were unwitting dupes and playtesters for me and Gary, but we had great fun, and so no one was hurt. In any event, where was I? Carbondale. Oh, yeah. So I told him what I was studying and all that, and he said, well, I do this newsletter, but I'm no dab hand at this kind of stuff. That's something that I see us going to is, we would hire an editor, they would take over the newsletter, and eventually they would grow it. And so over the course of a couple of conversations, I ascertained that what he meant by grow it was make it bigger, make it more popular, and he didn't want to make a house organ. Now, house organ is often used as a pejorative. I respect house organs. A house organ is a magazine put out by a game publishing company that talks about their products. how to play the game better, a new strategy for an opening move, or a deep dive analysis into the game itself, especially if it's a simulation. So there's nothing wrong with those. I read Strategy and Tactics, which was a house organ. I read Moves. I read the General. General for Avalon Hill, Moves for SPI. And I was a board gamer. Little secret I'll share. When people ask me, "Are you a gamer?" I go, "Yep." They ask me what kind. I tell them in this order: boards, minis, and RPGs. And that's kind of where my interest still lies. I still consider myself a board gamer. My true love is board gaming. I'm known for RPGs, and I have a lot of fun with them, and I'm pretty good at them. But when me and my buddies, bad grammar, when my buddies and I, there's 4 of them, we try to get together every other Wednesday, and we play board games, and or the occasional board/card, board game that uses cards, like a Ticket to Ride or something like that. Anyway, I got off the topic there. All right, so I said, okay, it's not going to be a house organ. If it's not going to be a house organ, I'm interested. And he said, no, that wasn't what he wanted. And we quickly realized within a couple of weeks of actually being employed and going over all the stuff that we had just speculated about, that we shared a philosophy as simple as the rising tide lifts all boats. Gaming was starting to explode. We had the corner on role playing at the time, but there was many other companies coming out with great games, board games, good minis rules coming out. Gaming was, as a whole, did very well in the first 2/3 of the 70s, and then continued. And so we decided that we would take strategic review, and I did 3 of them. And if you can see, my influences start with the first one that was printed with color ink, and the last one had a full color cover off. We used the art off of Classic Warfare on the cover of it, and had a good piece of art. No point in wasting it and paying money for a piece we didn't need. So my original goal was to take strategic review and spin it into a magazine. Actually, 2. Gary and I never lost our love of historical gaming. I've told you before, I'm a closet tanker. Used to have literally thousands of micro tanks. Train pulled out of the station there. Started thinking about my tanks. Boy, that got me. Where was I? Oh, bear with me here a minute. Ever since the chemo, this happens once in a while. Oh, okay. Growing the magazines. So the idea was that we would put out a new new gaming magazine, and that's what the masthead said. And we would call it The Dragon, and that's how the magazine was originally published under a 2-word title, The Dragon. And we put out a sister publication that would come out on alternating months called Little Wars, because I was still very much a historical gamer, and I didn't want to miss that part of the growing hobby either. And we thought it would be best to keep them separate, because I'd probably get more people to write Little Wars stuff for a magazine that was all history than I would to get them to write for a magazine that also had goblins and dragons and crap in it. So as it happened, we ended up eventually folding them back together for a number of reasons. Number one, people just couldn't get it through their head that we could do anything except fantasy. Did a great board game called William the Conqueror 1066. It sat and pretty soon was like, last week's guest that's still here, or old fish, stank. And it was a shame. And Little Wars never really caught the market subscribers. It certainly wasn't from a lack of quality authors, because when I started watching the History Channel and the Military Channel and that, about 1 out of 3 talking heads back then, when I started, were guys that had written articles for me when they were just finishing up high school or in college or whatever, who had gone on to become noted scholars in their fields of history. So we eventually decided that the numbers said, we'll put them back together and we'll go with about a 60-40 or a 65-35 fantasy to history mix. Didn't always go quite. Sometimes it was 75-25. I don't think it ever went above 35 for the historical, because quite frankly, I had a limited number of pages and I knew what sold and what they wanted to read. And so I tried to have a little something for everybody. And we folded them back, or we meshed them back together and became a monthly. And that was when it really took off. Periodicals division really took off. We did Snits and Snits Revenge and Awful Green Things from Outer Space. And Trampier did a absolutely brilliant, beautiful backgammon board that we included one holiday season as a gift to all our readers, stapled into the center. It was gorgeous. We put it on, as heavy a stock as we could back then. And we were doing a lot of different things. We had comics. The day that I met J.D. Webster and he showed me this. Well, actually, I met 2 of J.D.'s friends at a convention in Lake Geneva. It was probably a winter con or a spring con, one of those little mini things we used to have. And they were from Deep South, Alabama and Georgia. And they were avid players. And they kept telling me about this friend of theirs who was going to be here the next day or whatever, who drew this comic strip about their adventures. And so I met him. It wasn't that weekend, but I got these scripts sent to me, I believe, a few weeks later. And I laughed my fanny off. They were hilarious. The very beginning, there's this big Hobbit conspiracy, and they rule everything. And they own the Thieves Guild. And, of course, Phineas, being a world-famous thief, couldn't deal with that. And it was funny stuff, and it made fun of the quirks and foibles of gamers. And so it went. And then, of course, we did lots of little single cells comics. Jake's did one for a little while called Dirt. It was just eyeballs in a black field. These 2 guys locked in a dungeon with one-liners to each other. And then at the convention, the first convention, we were in Parkside. I met this red-haired, hairy guy and his blonde, hairy friend. Their names were Dave and Jason. And they started telling me about this game they were designing. And I was having trouble following it because, we're in the middle of the dealer area. And I said, all right, tell you what. When the dealer hall closes, which is like 5 or 6, whatever, I said, I'll get with you then. We'll go outside and we'll chill. Because they had some really nice benches that overlooked some big fields back then. So I got to play Titan using sticks and rocks and some army men and some Mark's Indians, just a handful of soldier types, scratched in the dirt under a tree. And they explained to me the very unusual movement section and how, if you know the game Titan, it has a very novel movement track section, and the way you build up your legions is influenced by the ways that you can move depending upon your circumstance at the beginning of your turn. So anyway, and he says, oh yeah, and then I do this comic strip. And I go, oh yeah. And he pulled out of a folder the very first Wormy strip in color. And I looked at it and it just knocked me out. And we agreed on a price. And he said, oh yeah, it wouldn't be a problem giving me one every month. Well, we all know that it's a lovely thing to promise, but it doesn't always work out. Though I will say he was able to be better at it than JD, because JD was in the Navy and he was a pilot and subject to orders. So sometimes I had to ink the dialogue on the strips. You can tell which ones weren't his because they're the ones that look different. So sometimes, he would just have them penciled in, and then I'd have to ink them and take out the pencil and everything. We got him in as office as we could. Same with Wormy. Wormy was a big hit, and Tramp was instantly, wow, that guy that does Wormy. And sure enough, like all the others that I discovered or were yet to discover, he ended up working for TSR. But unlike everybody else who pretty much did as they were told by their production managers, that no, they don't have time during the day to be drawing pictures for Tim. And that, it's fair. And when I got in a real pinch, Sutherland was always able to give me a little bit of help when it was really, really important. But I stayed away. Tramp was the exception. He told him right from the beginning that if he wanted to do something for me, he would do it. And whether he did it on his own time or whatever really wasn't important, as long as he had whatever was required of him at the deadline he was told to have it at. And he was real adamant about that. And I was real glad about it because I ended up having a double front cover original, and I still have the back cover where we're all riding in the sleigh at Christmas, being pulled by flying green dragons, us being all the original TSR folks. And we became great buddies. He had seen Phineas and said, hey, I can do this one. And so about that time, Dragons started taking off. We started getting into more outlets. People started increasing their orders. One of the greatest compliments I ever received was I did another magazine after I left TSR called Adventure Gaming. And I followed the same ethos. All games, don't waste space on negativity. If you just do nothing but tell people about great games and steer them onto it, they'll buy you again next month. And then Ronnie got elected, and then he tried Reaganomics and the trickle-down theory. And about 65% of all the small mom and pop hobby shops ended up going out of business by 1984. And so that terminated Adventure Gaming Magazine. And the greatest compliment I got was when Jolly Blackburn told a bunch of people in my hearing that the whole reason he started his magazine, Shadis, and started doing the nights in the back of it and that, was because it was an homage to my adventure gaming, that he used to drive an hour every month to go get a copy at the hobby shop, the closest hobby shop that sold it, because we were still growing. But his Shadis followed pretty much the early Dragon format and mix and everything, and because people don't want to just hear about one game, they can do that. They can do it through the house organ if the place publishes one, or there'll be a fan group that shares ideas in that. But in this case, Jolly wrote a magazine that talked about all sorts of gaming. Of course, now the Knights is all about Kenzer. Makes sense. Let's see, what else is on here? I got to put my glasses on, pardon me. Sometimes this late at night, I don't read to go so well. Okay, well, I guess that only leaves one topic that I'm going to talk about. And that's 7 days in Gary's office. Till a few years ago, when I told this story at a dinner at GenCon, I never knew it made any difference. When Gary and Brian hired me, I was hired to be the editor. That meant I edited. Of course, the definition of editing was a little broad, and I also wrote. But I edited stuff like formal letters and, we would puzzle over the wording of a loan application, or whatever. And so I edited. And there came a time when we knew that we had to do something to regather the game, do some codification. And as I've said before, the best reason for us to do this codification was tournaments from which we made a fistful of money every time. We couldn't find enough DMs that ruled the same way. So we went to standardized rules, if you will. The antithesis of OD&D, because now it's in the book, so it must work that way. Well, as I point out to people nowadays, I base all my stuff before those books. Anyway, it was a Wednesday or a Thursday. I had a magazine getting ready to go to bed. The paste up was finished. The printer was coming to take it. 6 or 8 days from now, I'd have a magazine in my hand. Usually 8 to 10 days, I'd have a magazine in my hand. And crates of them downstairs. So Gary stopped by and said, what's your schedule look like? I said, well, issue so-and-so, number such and such, whatever, is going to printers tomorrow. So I'm just got, the normal odds and ends. And he said, well, get all your odds and ends done, get that out to the printer and clear your schedule for next week. Okay. I generally had a week of burnout after every issue went anyway, kind of a postpartum depression that I find the other editors and publishers also suffer from. So I realized I wasn't quite as strange as I used to think. But anyway, I said, okay. So I come into work on Monday. Every bulletin board in the building is missing. They've been taken down off the walls. My office, Brian's office, Mike's office, downstairs, the hallway. They've all been taken down. Gary had gotten there very early in the morning and taken a claw hammer, taking them all down. Good thing Terry wasn't there at the time who put all those up, because he'd have had a heart attack. In any event, Gary says, all right, Tim, come on in. And then he calls downstairs to whoever was answering the phone and said that there'll be no phone calls for either he or I, except for our wives, until further notice. I thought, oh, we're going to have a long meeting. Further notice went almost 7 days. What we did in those 7 days, Monday through Friday, all of the next Monday and part of Tuesday, I came into Gary's office and saw they had all those corkboards nailed up all around his office. His whole walls are covered. And he's got index cards stapled into the tops of them. They're all blank. He's got a whole stack of about 8 brown boxes and 2 big pairs of brand new scissors and 2 boxes of push pins. And I said, okay, what we doing today? And he brought in a card table. So we had his desktop and I had a card table top. He said, we're going to create AD&D and Basic. I said, okay, we've been talking about Basic for some time. Basic was toned down. The blood was downplayed. Didn't have some of the really objectionable monsters in Basic. And we've been talking about an intro, and we've been talking about finding someone who was skilled at going at younger people. And out of the blue, a series of events, and Dr. Holmes ends up presenting himself with all the credentials we're looking for. And over the next 6.5 days, we'd break for lunch, and we quit at 5:15 every night. We start at 9 have a half-hour, 40-minute lunch, and then quit at 5:15. And we had no phone calls except for our wives. And after the second day, they knew not to call either. We cut up at least 8 sets of the books. And one side of the office was basic, and the larger wall was advanced. And so, snip, snip, page 1, page 2. That's why we needed so many, because we had to have back and front. And so we decided at that point what was going in and what was going out. And cut. That took about 2 days. Approximately 2 days. And then after we had everything, it was like, okay, in basic, this will be this many points of potential damage. In advanced, this will be that many points of potential damage. So we ramped up the AD&D and we softened the basic a little bit so that, 10, 12-year-olds would live longer and love the game. Nothing new about that. That was just good marketing. And so the rest of that week, we went over paragraph by paragraph every one of the little brown books and every one of the supplements, except for Swords and Spells, because that was mass battles and had no application here exactly. And decided what was going to go where and how ramped up it would be or toned down or buffed down, because this was our chance to fix the patchwork that we had created. And I'm able to say that I only won one serious argument in this whole period, and that was on the magic missile, which I always thought was a really silly spell, because when you're a poor puke and it's all you can take, it either lands like a barrage of 60-millimeter mortars or it's a dud like a wet firecracker. So at least it always hits for 1 to 3 points of damage. Now you can at least light the fire or knock off that troll that's staggering around with 1 hit point left. In any event, that's what we finished up on Friday. We had it all. And then Saturday or Monday, the following Monday, came in, looked at it afresh. We made a point of not doing anything work-related for the Saturday and Sunday. And came in and looked at it all again on Monday. Did a little more tweaking. And by noon Tuesday, we were done. So we had this big box of stuff that went to Jarek Holmes. And we had this other much larger box of stuff that was going to Gary. So I midwifed AD&D First Edition. It was an outgrowth of all the little bits and pieces I'd put in here and there over what got there. And then I didn't do much of anything else with that side of the business other than read Mike Carr's first manuscript that he brought back for the first hardbound. At that point, I pretty much backed out of the game design part, except as a occasional playtester. My periodicals division was going gangbusters, and it demanded all of my attention. And I had a child at home and another one on the way, or he was born in '79, so I may have had a baby, but no, that was after the fact. But in any event, I never really had the time or the inclination, to be honest, to do anything but play test after that. I was plenty busy with my own stuff, my T-shirts and box games and all kind of stuff we were doing on our own, and calendars, and then we did a best of, and so that pretty much ended my active finger in the pot of D&D or AD&D now at that point. And of course, I wasn't there when second and all the other silly numbers came out. So I will say that second is the least offensive of the group, because it's really a better editing than first, but relatively unchanged. And that brings me to the end of my list of things to talk about tonight. Again, as always, I get my ideas of what I feel like talking about from the comments you guys leave here or on Facebook or whatever. I'll briefly tell you about a new kind of game I ran today. And I don't claim the creative. I didn't make it up. I watched Frank Menzer do it a couple of times. You take your players. I gave them. It's a great fun game. I gave them all mid-level guys, and in fact, I used the same mid-level people that they were before they got turned into mice in the other adventure. And anyway, I had them all write two things on an index card, and I promised them that at least one of those things would turn up in the adventure that I was going to create right there on the spot as we went, and that they all had to be honest, and when they recognized something of their own, they had to shut up. No metagaming. It was wonderful. I had so much fun. They had so much fun. They're on Facebook about it afterwards. As it happened, I used all 12 and proving the old school. For instance, one's card had Gateway to Another Dimension and Undead Vixens. So I gave them a gateway to another dimension, And when they got there, they were attacked by a pack of undead foxes. Didn't say what kind of vixens. I knew where she was going with it, hoping to get a little racy, but we had the pickle-licking incident later on, which wasn't nearly as much fun as it sounds. I was able to use all 12 of them. And as it happened, I'd say 8 of the 12 were actually paired together, never even got split off the card. I just combined the two things they gave me, disparate though they might be. So we had the one card had a pickle and a red dragon. So I made it a giant pickle about 30 feet long, like bigger than the Wienermobile for Oscar Mayer. But the dragon only had an 11-foot wingspan. He was a pygmy. He was still a red dragon and nothing to mess with. And he did inflict some damage on a couple of people and didn't take any. But somebody finally found a way to talk to him. And so he named their price. And he named his price to give them the key that they needed. So then they had to turn around. And it was great fun. Whenever I got tired of them going down a dead end, like when they basically veered off the railroad track, well, all of a sudden it was just impassable. And the jungle had grown up, and it was full of huge spikes oozing sap. Who wants to try to climb it? And, of course, they go back and get back on track and go on to the next thing. There were 6 players, and they all had to be able to get a key to find their way out. And, of course, finding their way out was very anticlimactic because all the fun was had in getting there. They were all alive at the end, but I think 2 of them died along the way. And I let them have a universal antidote. And that's a convention thing that I do. A convention that I do that allows somebody that made a hard mistake early in the game to come back in and not waste all the money they invariably paid to play in the game. And it went well, so I'm looking forward to doing it again, hopefully with an even bigger group to Game of Whole Con in November. And if any of you are watching this and are planning to go, hope I see you there. Otherwise, I'll say goodnight and talk to you the next time.